When I was making this video, my thoughts were all about Easter, especially after we received this really pretty bunny fabric from Maycover. And for a beautifully laid table for Easter brunch, a nice bread basket is a must. I made this one like a classic utensil, but the highlight is the small edge in an accent color that stays visible no matter which way you turn your basket. And now I'm going to show you how it's done. Just FYI, I'll make a note in the video description on how much fabric you will need. The basket I'm making in this video is 15 by 15 centimeters or 6 by 6 inches. I start with 4 fabric pieces of the same size, 2 exterior and 2 interior pieces, and I iron the thin fusible woven interfacing G700 on the wrong side of all 4 pieces, and in addition I ironed the fusible fleece H630 to the wrong side of the exterior pieces. I just cut them a little bit smaller without the seam allowance. For the contrasting edge, I have cut a small strip which I have ironed in half lengthwise, wrong sides together. On all 4 pieces, I have marked the squares for the bottom and cut them out. I start assembling the basket by sewing together the bottom edges of the 2 exterior pieces, right sides together with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. I finger press the seam and top stitch on both sides along the seam. This way the seam allowance will stay nice and flat despite the fusible fleece. Then I will sew together the 2 side seams of the exterior piece. And again, I finger press these 2 seams open. Next, I'm closing the 2 side seams of the interior piece. Again, I finger press the seams open. Moving on to the strip of contrasting fabric, I sew together the 2 short edges so I get a small loop. You just need to make sure that you're not twisting the strip. Then fold it again along the crease that you have made earlier. Now I make a few marks along the edges of all 3 pieces. The first one I make on the strip exactly opposite to the seam. The easiest way to do that is by making a tiny snip within the seam allowance with a pair of fabric scissors. I then place this mark exactly on the seam and make 2 more marks on the edges I now have. I repeat this with the other 2 pieces, and here I just need to match up the side seams to mark the center between them along the long edge. I turn the interior piece right side out and pin the folded strip of contrasting fabric along the edge. All the marks and seams should match up and the raw edges of the strip and the interior piece are aligned. I sew these 2 pieces together with a very long stitch and within the actual seam allowance. I tuck the interior piece in the exterior piece so they are right sides together, the upper edges are aligned, and the side seams and marks should match up. Now I sew along the upper edge again, this time with my regular seam allowance, and the strip of contrasting fabric is now caught properly between the two other layers. I grab into the basket and pull everything out so all pieces are right side out. That's fairly simple because I haven't closed the seam at the bottom of the interior piece yet. I pull all the pieces straight and flat and iron the upper edge with the accent strip. At this point, that's much easier than later when that bottom seam has been sewn together. I then push one of the basket pieces into the other so they are wrong sides together, and I top stitch all the way around the upper edge close to the seam but on the actual basket, not on the accent strip. For this I'm using my blind hem foot and a stitch length of about 3 or 3.2. In this case I didn't backstitch at the beginning and end of the seam, but to make it as invisible as possible I knotted the ends of the threads and used a needle to hide them between the fabric layers. Now I turn the basket inside out again and close the bottom seam of the interior piece, leaving an opening for turning everything back later. To give the basket its square shape, I'll now close the cutouts at the corners of the bottom. I pull at those cutouts until I get two aligning edges and make sure that the seams at the center of these edges match up. I'll do this on all four corners, 2 in the interior and 2 in the exterior pieces, and sew them together with my regular seam allowance. I carefully turn the basket through the opening in the bottom, and it's always easier to push than to pull the fabric through this opening, so there's a smaller chance of accidentally ripping the seam. Now make sure I have nice and pointy corners and the interior is spread evenly. All that's left is to close the opening in the bottom seam, but aside from that, the basket is now finished. You can roll down the upper edge if you like, which gives the basket a bit more stability, and you can turn the basket inside out completely for a whole different look. Next up is a little experiment because I wanted to see how I could add handles to my basket. For that I cut 2 pieces of polyester webbing and carefully melted the ends with a lighter so they won't fray later. Along the edge I make small marks with even distances to the side seams, and I stick the webbing pieces behind the turned down edge at these marks. I fix them with some clips and fold them back up around the edge. I make more marks on the center of the handles because I don't want to sew them to the basket, but instead I want to affix them with rivets. And for that I need to punch holes through all of the layers. And of course, this one time I'm using them in front of the camera, my pliers completely fail, so I have to punch the holes through all layers separately. And by the way, it worked completely fine and punched the remaining 3 holes through all layers like a knife through butter as soon as the camera was turned off. When I'm done punching all the holes, I poke the longer part of the rivet, the post, from the outside through the layers and snap the small cap in place. All rivets are prepared and I'm finally able to test my newest toy, a hand press, so I'm finally able to set my rivets properly and straight. In the past I used an anvil and setter and it was usually a disaster and quite crooked. But now with the hand press, it's so easy and pretty. I'm so happy. Now we're already at the end of this video because my little Easter basket is all done. Like I said, I will make a note of all the measurements that you need in the video description. I'm working on an English version of our website right now, and as soon as I'm done, I will add a link to our blog post where you'll be able to find more infos on how to customize and sew these fabric baskets. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. This was Jenny from Serendipity Quilts, and hopefully you'll be back for my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye!